Goats were one of the first animals to be tamed by humans and were being herded over 9,000 years ago. Did you know there are over 300 distinct breeds of goat? Goats are intelligent animals. They can be taught their name and even to come when they are called. Tonight we're visiting a goat farm in Nadi and linking up with Dr. Ash from Animals Fiji to learn about goat welfare, including the common issue of goat footrot. Animals Fiji received a call from Mr. Sanjay regarding a hoof problem with his goats on his sheep and goat farm in Nadi. We followed Dr. Ash to the farm for their checkup.
Today we are at Mr. Sanjay's goat/sheep farm, and the primary complaint is there's been a few of the goats that have been having some hoof problems, so we're here to address it. So Mr. Sanjay, how many goats does your farm have at the moment?
I've got 15 goats in total and 8 sheep.
Right. And the goats are the ones that are having the hoof.
Even
The sheep are having
well.
it as well.
Yeah.
Right. And how long have you been having the goats and sheep around this area for?
Maybe year and a half or so.
Right. Do you ever change the location?
Yes.
Yeah. There's other paddocks that they go to as well.
Yes.
Right. And they are on dewormers, I presume.
Yes. I've got some.
Okay. And you would have them as drenches, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we managed to get one of them who has a bit of hoof problem. Now these are free-range goats. They are never been on a rope, so they're very skittish. But at the same time, it's a bit of a workout to get them, as you can see. So we have managed to get one of them, which is having one of those hoof problems. Mr. Sanjay assures us that those ears have been like that for a bit since he has bought them. So it's probably due to trauma at some point, maybe dog bites, maybe got caught in a fence, etc., etc. So some very important things to look out for when we are working with goats is the handling. Dolly is doing a really good job of keeping the goat calm. You don't want to stress them out too much, otherwise they tend to have higher temperature, higher heart rate, and they could even go into shock. Right. So firstly we would have to see the physical body conformation. We usually just observe them from a distance where we could have seen the ear pinna being damaged. We can see some really nice conformation on the limbs, but when we go towards the hind limb, then we could see there's some issues with the hoof, as you can see here. So this is very common in Fiji and indicative of this condition called footrot. Right. Footrot is a very easily or a very contagious disease which is spread by this bacteria called Fusobacterium necrophorum. So those bacteria actually live in the soil and they thrive in a climate as Fiji's. They thrive in areas which are moist, humid, and quite hot, basically. So we can see that the field that they are being kept on is quite soggy at the moment. And while I was talking to Mr. Sanjay, he has said that this footrot issue has been happening for a period on his farm. He has tried various types of treatment, they get better, and then it reoccurs. Right. So what I would like to explain is how we can actually get sort of overcome this issue in farms. Footrot is very common among almost all the farms which would contain goats in Fiji. Right. What you have to understand is it's the soil. These bacteria stay in the soil, right? And they are more present in soggy, humid areas, as I've said. So what would be happening is once a hoof is damaged or a limb is damaged at some point, what you could observe is smell, a lot of moisture and debris buildup, especially around those areas in between. And the treatment is something which any farmer can buy from the nearest Ministry of Agriculture department. Actually, it's copper sulfate. You can sort of make a solution of 10%, sorry, and then you have to use it as a foot bath. So you have to do that daily for goats having this condition. And copper sulfate is a hoof parting agent, which means it strengthens the hoof, and you have to keep cleaning the hooves and the areas affected until they get better. And they will use that foot dip and have all her limbs or all her hooves immersed in that for 5 minutes daily until the hooves sort of because right now they're quite soft and they are painful for her to walk on. So once the hoof harden a bit, then she'll feel a bit better, and then we'll be recommending to have her isolated in an area where she's not much in contact with really boggy or just mud in general. And we would have her clean and apply betadine, which is sort of will help with the bacteria growth, etc. at the site. And we'll just give her an antibiotic injection just to help her initially, just to kill off bacteria at site. But at the same time, it will be back to square one if you put the goats back into this kind of field, because they'll just get the problem again. Right. There's 3 things that farmers need to look out for. Right. When you're suspecting your goat to be unwell, sick, or anything of that sort. First is you have to look at the general appearance and the hydration status of your goat. Right, hydration status of a goat is usually felt via you doing a skin tan. Right, if you pull on a loose piece of skin, it should go back to its place immediately, so within a few seconds. But then if this is delayed, that would suggest dehydration. Right, dehydration is, so if you have a large herd of goats, you wouldn't know which goats are drinking well, which ones are eating. So this is one of the ways to know if your goat is well hydrated or not. Then secondly is this thing called the FAMACHA scoring. FAMACHA scoring is a score chart which tells you of anemia in goats, basically. I do not have the score chart with me, but I'll just describe it to the best of our ability. It's a score chart which goes from 1 to 5. 1 being, so it's based on color. 1 being red, 5 being white, and in between there is obviously light red, pink, white, pink, and then white itself. And where you have to observe this color is sort of in the eyelid or the conjunctiva. So just that. So if you can see, I would score that as a 3, or or even closer to 2 to 3. So that color there, right? And that would indicate to me what level of parasites a goat has. So for years, in Fiji, we have had farmers go to the local agriculture departments and get drenches without actually knowing what it's for, how to use it properly, or what are the benefits and the cons of using these kind of products. So there has been advancement in management for goats. There's been a lot of theories, so we can no longer be using the same protocols and approaches that we had been using in the 80s or 90s. Now we have something known as smart drench. Smart drench happens when, so the theory behind smart drench is you only drench an animal when it's needed. So you do not go every 21 days. I'll keep drenching my goat just to make sure that it doesn't have any parasites, etc. What this will ultimately lead to is resistance. At one point, the drench or the dewormer being used on the animal won't work at all, and that could just spell a huge disaster for the whole industry, small ruminant industry. It has happened in many countries where certain brands or certain chemicals that were used for drenching is no longer applicable, just because they've been used so much over time, and they have been used improperly. They have not been able to conform to newer ideas and research that have been done, and that has led to a small ruminant industry which cannot thrive at all. So this is something very simple. You look at the FAMACHA, as I was explaining. Look at the eyelid. Try to make out what score your goat would be on, right? Anything that would be lighter than that, we would be putting it as a 4, and if it's white, then that's a 5, and that would mean definitely it needs to be dewormed, right? If it's still pink, if it's still on the red side, all good. You don't need to deworm your goat. And at the same time, if one of your goat is having a high FAMACHA score, that does not mean you deworm everyone. It's individual, right? And especially if you're keeping sheep and goats together, you cannot be deworming all your sheep based on the result of a goat, because the resistance to parasite, or how debilitating parasites are to sheep and goats, differ. Sheep tend to be a lot more resistant to a lot of the parasites, where goats, just because of evolutionary reasons, tend to be quite susceptible to disease that are related, or that could especially if the immune system reduces because of increased parasites. The same level of parasite in a sheep and a goat would have different effects. A goat could be very ill, whereas a sheep would go by as it's just a normal day on the field.
Coming up, it's time for some goat fact or fiction. Let's debunk some common goat myths. First up, do goats eat everything in sight? Although goats do like to explore things with their mouths, this is actually not true. They can be surprisingly picky. Goats get their reputation for eating almost anything because they like to walk around and sample a wide variety of foods, as opposed to grazing a pasture like cows or sheep. Goats will eat hay, grass, weeds, grain, and sometimes even tree bark. The main part of a goat's diet is called roughage. Roughage is usually grass or hay that is high in fiber and has relatively low calories. I've even heard that they can ingest like a tin, like can.
Oh yeah, that's actually true. There's this condition called there's a disease actually. It's a hardware disease.
Yeah.
Where goats, ruminants in general, can have a perforated stomach. They have perforated just the gastrointestinal tracts, just because they ingest tins, nails, sticks, which it just causes them a lot of harm.
Did I mean to do that, or are they just like,
again,
hey, this looks nice? And
again, the higher IQ levels that goats sit at comes at a price.
Oh, okay,
Right.
okay.
So them being a bit smart makes them inquisitive, and inquisitive sometimes gets them in trouble. Like how they say, curiosity kills the cat.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, goats are something similar to that.
Okay. Speaking of intelligence, how intelligent are goats exactly? Goats are very intelligent and curious animals. Their inquisitive nature is exemplified in their constant desire to explore and investigate anything unfamiliar which they come across. They communicate with each other by bleating. Mothers will often call to their young, or kids as they're known, to ensure they stay close by. Did you know goats can actually read our human body language? They can differentiate between facial expressions and prefer happy, smiling humans.
You might have seen videos of people trying to help goats out of predicaments, and they allow them to do that.
Yeah.
They would not. They would not try to get away and hurt themselves, etc. Because goats are aware of humans trying to
Who are
help
trying to
them.
help them
Yeah.
and who are trying to harm them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So every time you see a goat, you walk up to a goat, make sure you're smiling like,
Yeah.
hi.
Definitely.
And also, last one, why do they like salt so much?
Or the salt licks. Usually in management practices, it's recommended to have certain salt blocks around the area, just because they take up a few nutrients from that.
A mineral lick, also known as a salt lick, is a place where animals can go to lick essential mineral nutrients from a deposit of salts and other minerals. Mineral licks can be naturally occurring or artificial, such as blocks of salt that the farmers place in pastures for livestock to lick. Natural licks are common, and they provide essential elements such as phosphorus and the biometals such as sodium, calcium, iron, zinc, and trace elements required in the springtime for bone, muscle, and other growth. Such licks are especially important in ecosystems with poor general availability of nutrients.
Yeah. But it's also kind of cool when you have salt on your hands and you can just, walk
Yeah.
up to them and get them to come in.
Exactly. If they trust you enough, they will do that.
Yeah.
If they don't, good luck trying to get
I
one.
have never been able to do it, but I saw people doing it and I was jealous a little bit, but
Yeah.
it looks fun.
Yeah, it would probably be fun, I guess. And they're quite receptive to fruits even.
Yeah.
Anything which they are able to digest, I think they would be able to take that quite well.
Fruits. Okay.
Yeah, there's you can even YouTube this. There's videos on how certain farmers include bananas, banana peels, etc.
Yeah.
in their diets,
Yeah.
so that they get a wide variety of nutrients.
Now let's check out this cool goat and sheep fun fact.
One of the main differences is sheep are grazers,
Yeah.
whereas goats are known to be browsers. They do graze, but primarily browsers. If given a choice, they would eat shrubs, they would eat plants, etc., which are low hanging.
Yeah.
Whereas sheep would go pretty low, eat everything right just a bit above the roots and try to just graze along the whole field. So what happens is when you keep both goats and sheep together is goats, generally the rule of thumb is goats would try to eat anything above their knee length or around their knee length,
Okay.
and they would go for that, whereas the sheep would go after that and they'll just finish off whatever is left over.
Bottom part.
And then win-win, both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but unless the sheep are allowed into the paddock first, that would mean the goats don't get anything.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
And there's evolutionary reasons for those things happening. Because goats were domesticated first and they were known to be mountain goats, etc. So they would be foraging and they would be getting more nutrients, and they used to stay in areas which would have shrubbery, etc. Whereas sheep were in areas with little vegetation, and they would have to be grazers and they would have to take in whatever nutrients they can acquire.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why goats are more susceptible to parasite or worm burden compared to sheep.
Okay.
With evolution, the sheep have developed higher resistance to worms compared to goats, and that's one of the reasons why if you have a worm burden of a specific amount in a goat and in a sheep, the goat would be showing disease, whereas the sheep would not really show anything. They would be going on about minding their own business. And along with that, there's a reason. There's one of the reasons as well why you need to drench goats according to their FAMACHA and worm egg count. And when you're drenching a goat, you don't necessarily have to drench the sheep at the same worm count, unless they have a FAMACHA scoring of the same levels.
And what about those rectangular shaped pupils?
Well, they have a rectangular pupil Well, it's again down to evolution, so that they have a better peripheral vision. So I was taught that when you have eyes in front, so you can see goats have eyes on the side, right?
Yeah.
So when you have eyes in front, that's to hunt, right? So any animal with eyes in front, usually your cats, dogs mainly,
Yeah.
they are known as hunters. Yeah? And you also a wild animal. So if you have eyes on front, they are to hunt. Whereas if you have eyes on the side, they are to run and hide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So goats actually have a 300-degree vision. Yeah.
Wow.
Whereas we have less than that. So that's why most of the times you can't really sneak up on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming up next, how to check a goat's temperature and heartbeat. Have you ever wondered how a goat's heartbeat and temperature is measured? Dr. Ash shows us how.
Okay, so in order to auscultate the heart or just have a listen to the heart, usually the landmark is look at the elbow of the goat and just go underneath that, and you'll be able to hear the heart loud and clear, or you can even feel the heart if you just palpate it gently. The average heartbeat of a goat is 80 beats per minute. And the average temperature is 38.5 to 39.5, just a normal temperature. So obviously for temperature in animals, we would have to take them correctly. And same thing applies for goats. There, boop. And we wait for a few seconds, we'll be able to get temperature. Now a high temperature usually in an environment like this, we would be expecting somewhere in the higher ranges. We'd be expecting close to 39.5 or just around that. But anything higher than 39.5, we would be suggestive of fever, right? Or just hypothermia due to a really high temperature or stress. Right. Right now she's at 40. Right, but she's still grazing well. That I would attribute that more towards stress than anything. Goats, if they're as I was saying, that there were 3 things that you have to look out for when you're examining goats.
Yeah.
One was the hydration status, the other one is the FAMACHA chart, and the third thing, most important, is the temperature. I would actually advise if you're having small animal farming, to always have a thermometer with you, so that you can at least know what's happening to your goat. If it's having low temperatures, then you could be giving thermal support. If it's having high temperatures, then you could be putting him in areas. This goes one sheep. Yeah, if it's having high temperature, then we could be giving some sort of support to cool its core temperature, washing it down or using just ice packs, etc. Or you could be thinking of it as fever and bringing it down to a vet to get that more better examined and treated. If a goat is having low temperature, especially if it's kids, a offspring of a goat is known as a kid, just a fun fact, and a male is known as a buck and the female a doe. Whereas for sheep, female would be a ewe and your male would be a ram, and the little offspring would be a lamb.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
just something to know of. So if your kid or one of your younger animals are having low temperatures, never feed them. That could lead to a lot more issues. Usually they're not able to digest or ruminate in that kind of scenario. Another fun fact about goats is, or small ruminants in general, is they have 4 compartments in their stomach. It's not 4 stomachs, but just 4 compartments. They have one stomach. It's just divided into 4 sections. And a goat can, so the process of them digesting and
and being able to use up all the nutrients they get from the grass, there's a phase known as ruminating, which is they'll bite and swallow all this grass, but they won't really chew on it. Here comes the fun part. Once it's inside, they'll regurgitate it in their free time, and then they'll chew it.
Oh.
So sometimes you'll see goats just standing and there's no grass around or anything, but they just continue to chew. That's what they're doing. They're ruminating.
Another thing is, goats have 2 tits. Right.
So ideally, when goats are giving birth, in an ideal setting, one offspring would be the best. One kid would be best for them. If they have 2, okay, fair enough, they have 2 tits so that they would be able to nourish both of them at once. But then there are scenarios when they have 3. And in those cases, unfortunately, we usually have a higher rate of mortality. The mortality could be one of them or all 3 of them. It's just because you have to think of it this way. If there's a certain level of nourishment that is being provided by the mother, if it's all focused on one kid, then that's a very strong and healthy kid. But then if it's divided into 2, okay, fair enough, they still stand a fair chance to survive. But then if it's divided into 3, a lot of times it's just not enough for them to make it through, into the weaning phases, etc. Goats take approximately 5 months from point of conception to maturation. So it's not as long as cattle, etc., which take 9 months, but at the same time it's a fairly intensive process for the does, especially for the mothers. So in those kind of cases where a doe is pregnant, you have to think of the energy requirement. You'll have to up the feed, and what we don't have in Fiji is enough education for the farmers that they are aware of these different stages of that goats go through. And for most people, it's out in the field, they'll eat grass, they'll get them back, they'll have kids at some point, but then when they are having diseases, etc., they can go at a big loss just because they do not understand how to care for them to reduce the chances of these things happening. We have natural disasters almost every year in Fiji. We have rain at certain periods of the year, too much rain at least, I think. We have flooding, and all these small ruminants especially are very much affected. You could ask farmers around the country that they would lose a lot of stock around these periods, and those are some of the reasons why the small ruminant industries do not thrive as much as you'd see in, like for example, New Zealand, which are large exporters of lamb or mutton, which I think Fiji is one of the countries which export a lot of that as well. But wouldn't it be great that at some point we'll be able to produce sustainably? We'll be able to meet that demand from farmers and just production houses that are locally based, and we wouldn't get that unless until we have large-scale farming or even small-scale farming like this that understand basics of basic management practices, which would help them in general, just so that we reduce mortality rates, we increase production, and just have a more holistic approach in farming.
Next week, join us for a wild adventure at Kula Wildlife Park.